Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Monday show. And thank you all for tuning in wherever you are. We are streaming across multiple platforms, actually, including the not so free speech YouTubes and Facebooks. But hello to all of you over there as well as X and Getter and Rumble and whatnot. So anyway, a very warm welcome to you. Yes, hi to those of you joining. Thanks very much for being here. We've got a great conversation to have coming up, actually. So you'll want to listen to this one because it's a topic we've talked an awful lot about for the last 5 years. But I'm really pleased that we've got a really interesting insight. And hi, Angela. Hi, Freddie. From the Islamic Republic of Essex. How are you, Freddie? Never mind. So much we could talk about later on in the week. As you know, there's quite a lot of political stuff going on here in the UK. What with the Parliament starting back up today, 1st of September. They're back from their holidays. And yeah, there's lots of shenanigans there. If you want to... thanks for reposting the stream, by the way. Let's get this out to everybody. We want as many people as possible to hear what we're going to talk about. And look, without further ado, without my waffle, he's sitting there. I see him in the background, sitting very patiently, waiting for me to bring him in. Listen, as I said, we have talked about the topic of vaccines a lot since 2020. But I'm really pleased to introduce to you guys my special guest tonight, and his name is John Leake. John, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
No, it's my pleasure, John. It's my pleasure, and it's so timely because honestly, we have talked on my channels a lot over the past 5 years about vaccines for obvious reasons, I guess, But I know that you have co-authored a book with Dr. Peter McCullough. Great guy who's been a luminary in the last 5 years on the whole issue of great title. I told you, I love the title: Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality. So those are, and I want to dig into that one, John, because it's a very interesting book. And so basically, I guess if we'd have been doing this maybe in 2021, YouTube might have had issues with this because it's not that you're challenging everything to do with vaccines, but you're asking questions, which I think is remarkably healthy and good. Maybe just to kick off with, John, tell us a little bit about yourself and how the book came about, and then we'll delve into the detail, folks. Okay, John?
Well, as introduced, my name is John Leake. I'm an American nonfiction author. This is my 5th book and my 2nd book with Dr. Peter McCullough. I live in Dallas, Texas, where Dr. Peter McCullough is basically my neighbor. And I came to this from the perspective of a true crime author. I have a history of investigating stories that have a true criminal action or someone who's been accused of a crime. And over the years in working in that genre, I've developed a certain, I would call it, forensic set of skills. I have actually worked as a translator for a pathologist at the Vienna Institute of Forensic Medicine in Vienna, Austria. I'm very interested in the context of true crime investigations, specifically forensic medicine, which is basically the examination of how do we die? What kills us? I mean, we're all going to die at some point. It's just a question of what is it? And so in early 2020, I should say March of 2020, I began to perceive that a lot of what we were being told by our public health authorities here in the United States mostly, but I also noticed a strange lockstep. The public health authorities in England, Australia, Germany, they're all basically saying the same thing.
Yep.
The other thing that was remarkable about it was, although we were told that this was a novel respiratory viral illness and a novel pathogen, it seemed like our health authorities already knew everything there was to know about it.
Yeah.
They knew that early treatment modalities would not work. They seemed to already know that a vaccine was in development and that it would necessarily work and that everybody would need to get the vaccine. And I remember Bill Gates in April of 2020 said, well, we're all locked down. It's a sort of unprecedented worldwide lockdown. And as Bill Gates said, the only thing that will enable us, the world, to go back to normal is if we all get this vaccine. And I thought, well, that is a remarkable statement, starting with the fact that we still don't have the vaccine. He was speaking about it as though it was a fait accompli, as though it was definitely going to come and it was definitely going to be safe and effective. It was as though it were a done deal already. So I started off questioning this. Just what exactly is this? What is the origin of this SARS-CoV-2 virus? And then what is the background in this kind of new vaccine technology that guys like Bill Gates are talking about? And so I contacted Dr. Peter McCullough, and we started conducting an inquiry together, first about just the nature of COVID-19 illness and the COVID-19 pandemic response. And then we began to ask more and more questions about this so-called new generation of COVID-19 vaccines. And so that was our starting place. And this is our second book about, I would say, the general subject matter, but I'll quickly conclude with this in terms of an introduction. Prior to 2020, neither of us had ever given much thought to the vaccine enterprise in general. We'd all received the shots on the childhood schedule. Peter McCullough and his wife had gotten the shots for their children, and we never really given this a whole lot of thought. But what we noticed was the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccines was so questionable and was done in such a fanatical spirit. And then as we looked into it, we began to realize there were distinct elements of fraud and chicanery in the way this was rolled out. So then we began to ask, well, if this is what our public health authorities are telling us about the COVID-19 vaccine, what have they been telling us about the rest of the vaccine enterprise? So we went back to the very beginning with our latest book, back to the 18th century, and we've taken a critical look at the entire vaccine enterprise in the West, going back to a smallpox outbreak in Boston, Massachusetts. This was a British colony at the time, in which really our first public inoculation campaign in the West was rolled out in Boston. And so we start with smallpox, and we work in 1721, and we work all the way up to 2021 with COVID-19.
You see, because for me, John, what you've just described is an experience that I think so many of us had up until that point. You just took these things, you didn't think too hard about it. There was a kind of established sort of mythology about them that you just went, well, most of us just went with. But then this kind of came left field, and for all the things you've perfectly described there, and I mean, I can remember sitting, I had friends worked in big pharma for one of the big global companies, AstraZeneca. Years ago, I remember sitting around a dinner table chatting to them, and their scientific people were telling me, how long it takes to create these things, for depending on what it is. But like, you're talking a process of many years, John. And so I could never understand, how was it, as you rightly, how could they have come out with the COVID vaccine so quickly using this new technology, which we'll talk about as well, so-called new technology? How could they do it so quick? Because it confounded everything. Even and I'm not a scientist, but my scientific friends told me it took the cycle of R&D to completion, safety trials, is years. It's not months. It never happened.
What I can say there is we had the same questions. And I mean, this is what we examine in our book, and what we've discovered is that we use this word vaccine in a very, very general sense.
Yeah.
For most of history, the 18th and 19th centuries, it wasn't exactly understood how precisely they work.
Yeah.
By the time you get to the latter half of the 19th century with the discipline of bacteriology, so a bacterium, something that you can actually see under a microscope, there were methods for culturing bacteria and pure culture so that you could actually isolate and culture a tuberculosis bacillus or a cholera bacillus. So the earliest idea of a precise understanding or precise theory of bacteria of a vaccine in terms of it really being understood what precisely we're doing, it was with bacteria, diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis.
Yes.
The irony in all of this, or the paradox, is it wasn't those bacteria pathogens that became these vaccines that were very well characterized. That wasn't the first vaccine. The first vaccine was against smallpox. And what I think is quite remarkable, it might sound like a nuanced point, but at the time that Edward Jenner in England, in Gloucestershire, England, first started publishing his pamphlets about what he called the variola vaccinae, which literally means smallpox of the cow. So the word vaccine comes from the Latin word vacca. And Jenner had this idea, he'd heard it from milkmaids in Gloucestershire, England, that there was this malady called cowpox. It seemed to originate on the udders of dairy cattle. Dairy maids would get these cowpox blisters on their hands. And the perception was, and the story was, well, a dairy maid who got these mild cowpox blisters on her hands or her forearms, the idea was if smallpox then came through town, these dairy maids who had already had cowpox would not get smallpox. So it's kind of an interesting observation. It has a certain amount of charm. But what's notable about it is the causative agent, the viral causative agent of both smallpox and cowpox were not understood. So it was really only in the 20th century, so over a century later, with the development of virology, that we began to have this thought, okay, it's a virus, it's a submicroscopic particle. And hence we then had, in addition to our original bacteria-based vaccines, there was then a development of viral vaccines. But anyway, I'm sorry to be technical, but what we have found notable about this whole enterprise is going all the way back to the 18th century, it's a lot of guessing, a lot of gambling, a lot of what I would characterize as being charmed by an idea as a concept, as a general concept, but not really understanding the precise mechanics of how it works. And then the other element of that is it's like falling in love. You know, love is blind. There's this initial falling in love with an idea, but then you actually get into, the devil's in the details, the particulars. And what we've discovered about the whole vaccine enterprise is it's like a really good idea. It's a really compelling idea conceptually, but it's in the execution, in the details of the execution, that has been problematic since the beginning. So now we come to this new era of molecular vaccines, messenger RNA and DNA vaccines. And it's the same thing. It's like, well, we have this idea, say with a respiratory virus, we could we could sequence the genome of the virus. We could use messenger RNA to then inject the code for this genome of a particular antigen.
Yeah.
In the case of SARS-CoV-2, it was for the spike protein.
Yes. Yeah.
On the surface of the nucleocapsid. We'll get the genetic code for that spike protein. We'll load it onto a messenger RNA vector. We'll inject it into the deltoid muscle, which will induce the deltoid muscle to produce this spike protein. And then the concept is, or the theory is, the human immune system will recognize that spike protein and produce an antibody against it. But what we see is we actually examine this concept in theory and practice is a lot of it is just gambling. It's like fascinating idea, lads. Wow, this is so cool. It's almost like we're playing God, programming the human body to create proteins, the building block of life. But how is this actually going to play out in practice? And the answer is we have no idea. None. No idea. None.
We were told that these COVID jabs were 100% safe. 100%
on what grounds? They had no experimental data. They had neither short-term nor long-term.
No,
and then when people began asking, well, hey, what about adhering to the standard practice, publishing your post-marketing data? Like what kind of feedback are you getting from the public about this new product? And Pfizer says, well, we don't want to.
No, 100.
We don't want to publish it. You think, well, no, wait a minute, like, what does that mean you don't want to publish? Well, we don't want to. And then the FDA, which is supposed to be an impartial regulator of this, actually agrees with Pfizer and says, yeah, we don't want to release this. We want 50 years
to
release this.
Yeah, I remember.
But it's like, well, that's really weird because in 50 years, all of us today who are receiving this, most of us are probably going to be gone. So what is the utility in keeping this a secret for 50 years? So as we record in our book, it's just one thing after another that is highly questionable at best and more likely nefarious.
Yeah, I mean, you see, the other thing is, I mean, as you said, we've kind of jumped a bit from the 17th, 18th century to 2020. But one of the things that I find most interesting, John, over the last, again, few years is that, and this brings it right back to the start, you know, the claims for vaccines are amazing, and the charts that they can produce that show, look at this, we introduced this, and then look what happened to that ABC problem, disease, and that proves that vaccines work. But in the historical impact is, and this is a question for you, you know, how do you think improvements in like nutrition and hygiene, how have they impacted versus the claims made by the vaccine manufacturers on a whole pile of these conditions? How do you view that?
Well, that's very clear. I mean, there's no question there. We just went back and looked at vital statistics data published by the U.S. government. I mean, as you see these vast improvements in living standards, approximately between the years 1885 and 1945, throughout Western Europe, Great Britain, the United Kingdom, first the U.S. colonies and then the United States. I mean, nutrition, enormous strides and growing food. The Haberman method of making nitrogen fertilizer very, very plentiful, refrigeration, pasteurization of milk. I mean, housing improvements, the urban poor in the winter, just providing adequate heating, clean water, building proper sewers to channelize sewage away from the drinking water. I mean, these are enormous strides and living standards that most of us today have sort of forgotten. I mean, we take a lot of this for granted. If you were to take a college graduate in the year 2024 or 25 and transport them back to London and just drop them in the Soho district of London in 1850, I mean, they wouldn't believe it. They wouldn't believe how squalid it is. They wouldn't believe how poor most people are, undernourished. I mean, the aristocracy are the industrialists and bankers. I mean, they were doing well, but most people were poor and undernourished.
Right.
And so I think this is a really, really important point. So, we get into the modern era of mass vaccination, and we see that kids aren't dying of measles, mumps, rubella, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis. What a lot of people don't realize is that mortality from those illnesses had already plummeted over 95% before the advent of the modern vaccine schedule. I mean, there's another element. I could get very technical in this, but I think a lot of people don't really think about this or talk about this, but it's very interesting to consider. I mean, roughly between, call it 1650 and 1950 in the West, you had this urbanization. So increasing numbers of people moving from the countryside and settling into cities. Okay. Drawing on the same sources of food and water and living in close quarters with poor sanitation and hygiene. Okay. So that is a very unnatural state of affairs. Suddenly you have all these people moving in densely crowded cities without proper technology, nutrition, and sanitation. So the other thing that I think is useful to think about from the standpoint of evolutionary biology, suddenly you have, and this is corresponding at the exact same era with the era of trade and exploration in Europe. So imagine London in the year 1854. Shipping is coming in from India with various pathogens like cholera that the people of the great city of London don't have very much immunity to. They're basically naive to virulent cholera bacteria coming in from India. And they don't have proper sewage channelization, and they don't have proper drinking water. So of course they're all going to get sick. Of course. But guess what? That doesn't happen anymore. I mean, we have a proper sewage system in London. We have proper drinking water. We have proper sanitation in London now. So I mean, there's no sense in talking about I mean, so let's take cholera. There was no vaccine, safe and effective vaccine for cholera. It was just cleaning up the drinking water.
That's right.
And so if you look at pretty much all of these infectious diseases, that's the reality of the situation.
And John, I think you make a great point. Between 1850 and 1950, in these sort of big growing cities that we had, the changes were massive. And I mean, as you said, back to London in 1850, most people have no idea how dreadful it was for ordinary people. They kept their animals in their bedrooms, for goodness sake. The hygiene was, well, there was very little hygiene. Yes, the aristocracy in their castles may have been a bit better, the industrialists, as you say, John, but the average people, they lived in horrific conditions. So it's no surprise when hygiene improved, when nutrition improved, when living conditions improved, that funnily enough, they stopped dying off in the ways that they had been with these so-called conditions. So it does, it's not that long ago, is it? I mean, 1850, but yet it could be a different era. Well, it probably was a different era.
Well, it was. I mean, if you'll pardon me, I'm just going to turn the temperature down just a little bit. It's hot still here in Texas.
It's always hot on this stream, folks. You can see John experiencing.
Pardon me. I beg your pardon. There was a famous incident, let's call it, in London in the summer of 1858. And the local newspapers had a lot of fun with it. They called it the Great Stink. Yeah.
Yes.
We have a whole chapter about this in our book. It was the hottest summer on record since mercury thermometers, or however precisely people were measuring temperature. As far back as people had measured temperature, it was the hottest summer on record in London. The Thames dried up. You had the Thames drying up, but then you had wastewater from the city spilling into the Thames. So you don't get adequate flow to carry this away. And at the same time, you have groundwater around the Thames being contaminated with sewage. So the local press said, look, I mean, this is unbearable. Like we're going to have to do something about the whole sewage infrastructure of London. And it's quite funny. Benjamin Disraeli was the head of Parliament at the time, and you can still read some of his statements about this. But the word is that Parliament was compelled by sheer stench to legislate a solution, and so they raised like £2 million. That's the other thing is. That £2 million could build the London sewer. I mean, that would cost $2 trillion now, but they built a sewer, and they at the same time, were careful about sourcing water and getting the sewage away, and that was the end of these cholera and typhoid fever outbreaks in London. You might have an occasional case of cholera or typhoid, but these outbreaks then quickly became a thing of the past. Well, most people don't even know about the Great Stink of 1858. They would be rather shocked to hear that.
Yeah, you're right. And I mean, obviously, Parliament sits on the banks of the River Thames. So you can understand why they suddenly were held to do it, John. That would have been...
Precisely. I think Disraeli, who I've always thought was one of the funniest guys in British politics ever, he said, the Thames is a Stygian pool reeking of ineffable horrors.
they knew how to use language. Yeah,
they did.
I see a point that's been made by one of our listeners. Rodents were very plentiful in these built-up conurbations, and of course there was no really pest control back then as well. So it was. The fact that people survived at all, John, actually impresses me. Not so much that there was disease, the fact that they managed to survive in these awful conditions. But that all improved so quickly. I mean, you're talking about that era, 1850s, 60s. This was the Victorian era here in the UK. Was an incredible time for innovation and putting in place essentially an infrastructure which, 200 years later, it's getting on for still there. It was amazing what those guys did. But it wasn't the vaccines. That's the point. It wasn't the vaccines that made the difference. It was these innovations we're talking about.
And the other thing that is so remarkable to study the development of civil works and infrastructure in Victorian England. I mean, you realize just the civic mindedness of some of these gentlemen in the Victorian era. I mean, really, really animated for a desire to improve society. It's not like they were getting Sir Joseph Balsagate. I mean, it's not as though he was the lead engineer of the London sewer. He worked on it for 20 years round the clock. I mean, it's not like he got rich on this. I mean, he was compensated for his work, but I mean, I think a lot of what he was doing was just a feeling of this is the right thing to do. I mean, it's for king or queen and country.
Yeah, but it made a difference. But the point is, as all this was happening, John, in terms of the infrastructure improvements, the hygiene, the better food supply, the better water supply, all of those things. We also had the vaccine industry revving up in parallel.
Developing. And we talk about probably the most important figure who's credited in the early development of vaccines is Louis Pasteur.
Yep.
We have 2 whole chapters about Pasteur, who, when I was a boy, I've always loved history. When I was a boy, I mean, Pasteur was kind of a hero of mine. I just thought he was such an interesting man. But, you know, we were pretty surprised as we got into his career. The Pasteur was really quite astonishing in his lack of transparency. He never disclosed his lab notebooks. There are many, many things about some of the vaccines that he's credited with that are extremely questionable. So that was kind of an eye-opening chapter in this story for us. I would say, you know, the era of vaccines as we recognize them today, it really comes on with the advent of the diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis vaccine. Which the iteration, which was then recommended by the American Academy of Pediatrics, was in 1948. That's when this vaccine really came on.
Which is sort of reasonably modern, isn't it? I mean, it's not, again, that is not that long ago, but by that point, was there a need for the vaccines? That one, those ones.
Well, so if you break this down, so let's start with tetanus. It's not a communicable disease. It's a disease that someone will acquire from an injury. A typical scenario in which somebody gets tetanus, it would be a farm worker in an environment with a lot of animal manure. And so you step on a nail or cut the hand, doing some kind of work in a dairy barn where there's exposure to manure. But, you know, as we get into, first of all, fewer and fewer people work in the agricultural industry. That's the first thing. The second thing is that safety equipment in the agricultural steel industries, there's different industries with a high degree of possibly getting cut or wounded. Safety, just basic gloves, the quality of footwear. I mean, don't forget that, you know, in the 19th century, even the early 20th century, a lot of poor farm boys didn't even wear shoes. I mean, they would go out to milk the cows without shoes. I mean, that was surprisingly common in the American South all the way into the 1950s. So, again, you know, you see a development of modern technology and production of things like shoes and gloves and hygiene, soap. I mean, what we think of as the modern era of soap, I mean, that really came on strong as a major industry where most households would have running clean water and soap. That's really an early 20th century you know, widespread. I mean, again, the wealthy would have handmade soap made in France or something, but for the average person, this is a really a modern technology. So pertussis, diphtheria. I mean, you can see where these diseases were a major problem, and poor slums, working class, or you know, this. In a place like New York City, tenement buildings. And we have the same thing: poor nutrition, poor hygiene. Diphtheria is interesting because actually in our era, we've tracked diphtheria outbreaks. And going back to the 40s, for example, there were pretty bad diphtheria outbreaks in Germany during the Second World War because people undernourished, being herded into basements together during all of these aerial bombardment raids. So undernourished people, it's cold, the infrastructure is being destroyed, and they're being herded together in subway tunnels or basements during air raids. There was an interesting diphtheria outbreak amongst vaccinated homeless people in Seattle. So living on the streets, inadequate nutrition, inadequate hygiene, not washing their hands after using the bathroom. So we've documented these things, once again suggesting with proper nourishment, proper hygiene, and proper sanitation, these bacterial diseases are really not such a problem. And the vital statistical data reveals that by the time you get to the year 1946, and a nation at that point, I'm speaking of the United States, there are over 150 million people.
Yeah.
The number of fatalities attributed to diphtheria and pertussis had already dropped down to about 1,000. So, I mean, of the whole countrywide.
Yeah.
So, these are the things that we examine in our book. And I think that if a reader were to pick up the book, he or she would be rather surprised by some of these details, which we take great pains to document.
I think that's a real service you've done. Actually, can we bring up the book here just to remind everyone what we're talking about here, which is just bring it up. Here we go. Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality by John and Peter McCullough. And it is good, John, that you've taken this very sober historical assessment of this topic. Because, you do say, I believe in the book, that vaccines for some things have made contributions and have been good, but in other things it's unclear. And, I would suggest that COVID's probably the best example of that. I still don't know what the point of them was. I really don't.
Well, we're pretty unequivocal in our assessment of the COVID-19 vaccine program. We believe it was just an unmitigated disaster.
Yeah.
It didn't work for reasons that we characterize in the book. It couldn't work, and it's dangerous. So it's an unmitigated disaster.
Yeah, but how is it, John, that big pharma companies like AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Moderna, how could they all have got it so wrong at the same time? How does that work?
Part of the problem is it's just intrinsic to the nature of an upper respiratory tract virus. And strangely enough, this was actually very well understood. I was rather surprised to see that none other than Dr. Anthony Fauci himself wrote about this in a 2022 paper. So I'll repeat, Fauci himself has acknowledged this in a paper. So upper respiratory tract viruses, coronaviruses, influenza viruses, and RSV viruses, they replicate very rapidly in the nasal mucosa.
Yeah.
And the nasal mucosa is fairly insulated from blood antibodies. Okay. Right. So this full immune response, which will come into play against a foreign pathogenic invader.
Yeah.
In the case of these particular upper respiratory viruses, they start in the mucosa, they very rapidly replicate, they very rapidly transmit, and you'll get that initial kind of feeling of a little bit of malaise, congestion, maybe a headache.
Yeah.
But by the time the full immune system with blood antibodies is brought to bear on this, it's only after the infection has gone down deep into the lungs, into the blood gas exchange region of the lungs, then antibodies start to be brought to bear on the problem. But as Fauci himself says in his 2022 paper, which we cite, this is already 10 days into the illness. I mean, by that time, the person who has this, they've been replicating the virus, they've been transmitting the virus, and they themselves have it. So again, I want to, because your readers may not believe me, given, or your audience, given Fauci's vociferous endorsement of these vaccines, they just don't work, period. So this brings us into the suspicion of fraud. I mean, maybe the thought was these could work. They could partially work. They could slow down the rate of transmission. But, already by August of 2021, CDC Director Rochelle Walensky is coming out and saying they don't prevent transmission. Well, guess what? We already knew that.
But it was even worse because she came out and said, right, so but that's because you need another one. You need your second one. And then Fauci came out, you need your booster. So
this raises the suspicion of criminal fraud.
Yeah.
It does.
It does, because there's no other. I mean, the way it worked, John, it went so weird. The claims made by Fauci and so many others, but he's probably the lead architect of this, I think. The claims that were made versus the scientific reality, there's a chasm. This was a guy who called himself Mr. Science. I am the science. But it strikes me that the great irony is it wasn't very scientific at all.
Well, I mean, I think that it's useful, particularly when we're speaking about the United States government. So the United States government has a bad habit of telling the American people, we're under threat. I mean, you go back to the Gulf of Tonkin incident with the presidency of Lyndon Johnson, or weapons of mass destruction with George W. Bush. So, we're told there's this horrible threat. In the United States government and U.S. government agencies, the United States military, United States government contracted industry, including the pharmaceutical industry, we must, it's an emergency. We must undertake these vast endeavors. And of course, there's billions of dollars that are being funneled to those who have relationships with the U.S. government. And, we must, you can hear Churchill, we'll fight them on the beaches. It's this kind of rousing thing. And then, well, maybe there weren't weapons of mass destruction. Maybe this COVID virus, maybe it didn't just emerge from nature. Maybe it actually came out of a laboratory. Maybe the biotechnology that was being shared with the laboratory, maybe it's American biotechnology from the University of North Carolina. And then so the government then kind of walks back and kind of begrudgingly, half-heartedly admits that, a lot of what we were being told isn't really true. But then we're kind of told, well, it was the fog of war. It was an emergency situation. But this is why we shouldn't grant emergency powers to the government. I just say we just don't do it. Because when you start saying, well, we'll suspend normal constitutional procedures in the event of an emergency, it shouldn't come as a surprise that we're frequently going to be told there's an emergency.
Do you think there was any point to the lockdown?
No. Well, I'll just ask your audience. It's a respiratory viral illness. I mean, are we all going to stay at home in some kind of a negative pressure chamber? I mean, these things just move around. I mean, how, and remember, this isn't just my perception. I mean, I'm just following the logic of what we were told. We were initially told we need 2 weeks to flatten the curve.
Oh, yes.
Now that means something very precise. It doesn't mean we need 2 weeks to isolate it and eliminate it. It means 2 weeks to flatten the curve of transmission in order to preserve hospital capacity.
Yes.
That's all that means.
Yeah.
So in other words, we only have so much hospital capacity. We can't have our hospitals flooded with severe pneumonia patients all at once. So we'll have to slow down the rate of transmission, flatten that curve of transmission in order to preserve hospital capacity. So that's what we're initially told.
Yeah.
And you could argue whether there's any merit to that or not. But then that just kind of became sleight of hand.
It did.
Well, it's actually to eliminate the virus and to isolate it, and put a fence around it in order to snuff it out of circulation. Well, that was obviously impossible. And I said from the very beginning of this thing, we're all going to be exposed to this for sure. Some of us will get a little bit sick. Some of us, it will just be imperceptible symptoms. Some percentage will probably get very sick, but there's no stopping the transmission of this. And I want to emphasize a specific point on this. The only honest state epidemiologist in the entire world, as far as I could see, was Anders Tegnell. He was the epidemiologist of Sweden.
Swedish guy.
And he came out and said what we all know. There's no containment of this. The cat is out of the bag. It's out there. It's circulating. The ship of containment has already sailed. It's everywhere. Yeah. And instead of getting the Nobel Prize for honesty, he's lambasted. That's when I knew that all of these people were lying. The treatment of Anders Tegnell, I thought, okay, we've got this is an epidemic of lying, is what it is.
Yeah. And one of the things that I thought was very, very a red flag was whenever they started to say the symptoms of COVID. Well, one of the most common ones is you don't have symptoms. How does that work, John? The main symptom, I remember my wife and I talking about it, and she said, well, look, if I've got have you ever had the flu and not knowing you've had the flu? No, you always know if you've got it. How can you have this COVID thing but yet have no symptoms? I mean, I think that's very, very, very odd, John.
Well, I mean, I would say that let's take a young, strong, athletic, well-nourished young man who has a very strong, vigorous cardiovascular system. He might just, if he's a college boy, he might think that he's just hungover. He might, it's in the summer, he might think he has hay fever. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about symptoms that there may be a symptom there if he's a very self-aware, really kind of wakes up in the morning and really takes an inventory of how am I feeling. But he might think that he has allergies. He might think he's hungover. He might just think he didn't get enough sleep the night before. There was no controlling any of this. No. There never was.
No. But then one of the things that's come out of this, John, as well, is that the whole mRNA technology platform, which was used to devise the COVID jabs, has then been subsequently sold to us as this is the future. We're going to solve everything by just having more of this technology. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that the messenger RNA platform, therapeutic platform, is important for your audience to understand that it was not initially contemplated for controlling respiratory viral illnesses. The original concept and the founders of BioNTech in Germany, which in many ways was the company that made the greatest advances in developing this. I mean, he explicitly says in his own writings that the initial concept was for cancer therapy. So you have a cancer that seems to have a genetic component. And the idea is you could use messenger RNA to somehow mend error or that miscoding in the DNA in order to correct for this cancer causing or this oncogenic thing.
Yes.
That and project was interesting theoretically, and maybe ultimately there will be some kind of valuable therapy that comes out of it. But it wasn't really going anywhere in terms of wide-scale commercialization. And then so along, and in early 2020 comes this respiratory viral pandemic, and it's like, okay, this has been on the shelf. We've been tinkering around with it, possibly for therapeutics against cancer. Well, now let's just sort of jump onto another horse or another train and see if we can get it up and running with this respiratory viral vaccine. So that's another element of this that I don't think has been very carefully considered or analyzed, at least not critically. So what is the future of messenger RNA? I mean, I think that it's going to require much, much more development analysis and above all, fully transparent, impartial, critical evaluation. It can't just be, oh, this is, that we've sort of come up with this brilliant new thing and then just would embrace it with religious fervor. I mean, it needs to be carefully evaluated.
Yeah. But see, that's one of the strange things about vaccines. It's almost like a religion. You used the word religion. There is almost a religiosity.
There is.
There is, and again, it's so strange that to me, that is how it, and again, not really very scientific at all.
Well, I mean, I think that there are a couple of things here that we explore in our book. When Sir Isaac Newton, when he started gaining these insights at the end of the 17th century about objects in motion, gravity, falling bodies, it was so brilliant. And it was so sort of sparkling and fascinating that he could mathematically describe the motions of bodies moving through space and the universal law of gravity. And the human mind at that point, at that moment in time, became bewitched by the idea you could apply something like Newtonian mechanics to everything, including the human body, including sickness, disease, and death. And it's just, what we call medical science is a lot of it is probability, plausibility, observation. But the idea that this is something that you could follow laws like the laws of Newtonian mechanics, it's just not true. So that's one thing that I think is important to bear in mind. The other thing to bear in mind is that the human mind is basically of a religious posture. We don't really know how the hell we got into this world. We don't know where we're going when we get out of it. We find ourselves suddenly alive, and these infectious disease pandemics would suddenly just be upon the city, with infants dying of measles or of smallpox. And it's completely terrifying. And no one understood the precise causes. They perceived it was contagious in the sense that it would spread from person to person, but no one understood precisely how, the mechanism of action. And so along comes this idea of a product that would protect you, almost in the way, it's not treat you for the illness, protect you from ever getting it.
Getting it in the first place,
So that I think ineluctably conjures, it's almost a godlike thing. God protects. The cross, the Saint Christopher medal, a priest giving his benediction. That's a protection bestowed from God. But suddenly it's not God, it's human ingenuity. So I think it kind of has the same mesmerizing effect on the human brain, that it's like protection is being conferred from, from on high. Only it's scientists. It's, as Anthony Fauci would say, I am science. Yeah. I'm the Pontifex Maximus of science. I have papal infallibility. You can't question me. So you see how this just gets out of hand. It's like, hold on a minute. It's like, you, Dr. Fauci, are a deeply fallible man. There are a million things that we don't know about the human body. We still don't know.
Yeah.
The extraordinary arrogance of any mortal man at any moment in time, thinking he already knows everything there is to know. Stop and think about the fallacy of that. I mean, if you graduated from medical school in 1950, do you think that you know everything there is to know about sickness and disease? No. Well, guys probably did at the time, but it's the same fallacious idea. So there's so much we don't know. There's so much that we still have to discover. And the only way we're going to do it is by free, unfettered sharing of information, observation, critical thinking, critical conversations. That's the only way. Censorship does not have any place in a world of inquiry.
I totally agree. Completely agree with you, John. I think that fundamentally we have to be able to challenge, examine, look at, consider, and put contrary views, and ultimately the best view will prevail, because that will be proven to be the thing. And that's what the past few years have demonstrated to me, that certainly something very wrong happened in 2020, 21, 22, those the COVID years. That was, would you say that was an unprecedented time in the history of vaccines, of health? Would you say that?
I would, because all of these people knew better. They did. I mean, you could say that Edward Jenner was jumping to conclusions, and he was guilty of wishful thinking. Well, I mean, Jenner didn't even know the cause of smallpox. No. He had no idea. He didn't know the cause of cowpox. So, Jenner can be forgiven for, enthusiastic jumping to conclusions.
Yes.
There's no forgiving these guys in 2020 and 21. I just think they're just rotten to the core, intellectually and morally.
I think so. Yeah, I agree. And globally as well, because we had them here in the UK, John, you had them in the States. I mean, as you say, with the odd notable exception, like in Sweden, for example, most of the global scientific community took part in this.
It's true. I mean, we say most. The question is, how many men and women were out there with a good inquiring mind, or good inquiring minds, who, with some training in empirical science or medicine, who did realize or did have an intimation, we're not being told the truth, but we don't really know who these people are. I mean, to some degree, they remain anonymous because you couldn't talk about it. I mean, all I did was interview Peter McCullough. It was a beautifully shot and microphones interview in a studio in Dallas. And all we talked about is his observations as a very senior doctor, peer-reviewed literature. I mean, we did nothing but just talk about things that were observable phenomenon and things that could be accessed in the body of literature.
Yeah.
I published that interview. This is May of 2021. YouTube took it down 3 hours later.
Okay. Yeah.
Shocking.
Yeah.
Shocking. So I don't see how we could attribute this to anything but just bad faith.
Oh, I think so. I can remember I quoted from the UK medical authorities, health authorities, certain statistics, and it was taken down by YouTube. And I was quoting the government, but it wasn't particularly statistics that they wanted to hear. And as I say, yeah, I'm completely with you. You know, I mean, I think we you know, the word Nuremberg trials somehow comes to mind as being, we need to have justice for the abomination to science that we saw, John. And I do remember paying attention to Peter McCullough during those years, you know, and there were some very decent, honourable people who were trying to get to grips with this. But it's difficult. You do an interview, YouTube take it down. How do you get the information out there? Do you know, they didn't want it?
It's true. And then we were talking about religion. I mean, this was so analogous to the Holy Office of the Inquisition during the Counter-Reformation.
Yeah.
I mean, just like eerily similar. It was almost like Dr. McCullough had been branded a heretic and excommunicated.
Yeah.
Very, very analogous. I mean, and then just the almost laughable quality of a lot of this. I mean, your Professor Ferguson at the Imperial College, you know, he does this modeling of a theoretical spread of this illness. His modeling then becomes the so-called scientific basis for instituting lockdowns in London.
Yes. That's right.
And then his own mistress, in the midst of the lockdown, comes to visit him.
Yeah.
Or your appalling health minister Hancock.
Oh yes.
Almost with sadistic relish, saying, you know, when are we going to have the next big scare so we can lock down London again? Yep. Come to find out, his sweetheart is visiting him and giving him a kiss in his office. I mean, I'm not going to be accused of inciting anything. Okay. So I'm going to choose my words carefully. They should at least be pilloried. I mean, the old fashioned pillory. I'm not talking about hurting them. No. But they should at least sit in a stock for an hour, you know, on Trafalgar Square or something. They should at least be disciplined, let's put it that way. And just nothing. There's just no accountability to any of this.
No, you're right. In fact, there's a little village very close to where I live, and they have got stocks from the 1800s or whatever, and they've preserved them in the main village square. And like you say, there's a few of these people I would love to see in those stocks. John, we've reached the end of our allocated time. Can we just bring up John's book again, please? Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology and Reality. It's a great read, probably an essential read because it's definitive and it really helps us, I think, understand the broad sweep of this whole area, which, you know, if you weren't aware of it before 2020, you sure as heck are in 2025. And I think I'm sure you'd agree, John, that, you know, that I always find that, you know, facts and statistics, that's the thing that helps us both. There's also, please follow John over on his X account as well. Follow him over there. And then John's website, you can go and check out many of his other works, which he has over there as well. So there's lots of material there for you to go and dive into, and I hope you'll find it useful. John, I want to thank you so much for giving us your time. My apologies. We tried to do this, I know, the other week, and my technology went up the left and we had to cancel it. So apologies for that, John. But thank you so much for coming along and speaking to our audiences tonight. And as I say, I hope to get your book with Peter's and, and just get all that information, because it's really, knowledge is power. And I think...
Yeah, I should say it is available on Amazon in the United Kingdom. So...
Yep, just check it out there, folks, and it'd be a good read, and you'll be the better informed after it. Listen, from John and myself, that's it for tonight. Thank you all very much. I'll be back later in the week, but from us for tonight, it's good night.